Hello and welcome to the Game Mess Game Club for August 2023, where this month we played Super Metroid, originally released for the Super Nintendo in 1994. I'm Mike Minotti, and I'm joined by a group of our patrons and mods over at the Game Mess to discuss the most super of all the Metroids. Very excited about this. Super Metroid is one of my favorite video games of all time. I played through it multiple times. I played through it twice to get ready for today during this month. One time, pretty normal playthrough. Then another time, actually made a good attempt to finally get a sub 3 hour ending, which felt good to do for the first time. Actually, I'd never done that before because usually I play this game a lot, but it's usually like every 3 years or 2 years or something like that. So this time I just went right back in after playing it. So I had a pretty good idea where things were. So I was able to get that time limit done. So my first question for everybody here is, what is your prior experience to Super Metroid before it came up in the Game Mess Game Club this month? Hey, Randy, go ahead.
Hey, so my first Metroid was Zero Mission around the time that it came out. I liked it quite a bit. Then I didn't touch it until I was looking for something to play on the Wii during the Wii drought, so I played Metroid Prime 3. Fell off of it, didn't quite stick with me for whatever reason. I'd have to revisit to tell you why. Then did not touch another Metroid game until 2018 or 2018 if you're crazy. When I played Super Metroid for the first time, the game in question, and I liked it a lot when I played it. Metroid Prime Remaster, I played when it came out this year and got about halfway through it and fell off. I thought it was all right. Oh, that's a different conversation for another day. And then played this again and liked it again. So that's where I'm at with it. No real nostalgia for Metroid. An appreciation for some of the games and just an appreciation for the franchise.
Yeah, and I do want to say, like, I didn't play this game when it came out. I don't think I ever even owned it for my Super Nintendo, even though I very much had a Super Nintendo growing up. I didn't actually get to it until I first played it on a emulator, like pretty early emulator, like 2000, 2001. It was before Metroid Prime had come out. That's when I first played the game and played through it and immediately fell in love with it. And then shortly after that, we got Metroid Prime, we got Metroid Fusion, and I was just kind of all about the Metroid ever since. And yes, you say, Randy, I do, in fact, mean the Z-SNES. I think that was the emulator then. Sean, hello, go ahead.
Hi. I'm very happy to be here tonight, Mike, where we will have a civil conversation with no one at each other's throats. This was my idea, yes, because I did want to finally get around to talking about this game because I have been slandered endlessly on several Game Mess podcasts. I am not, in fact, a Super Metroid hater. What the thing is that I've been a lifelong Metroid fan who started with Fusion and Prime because Super was very inaccessible for a very long time. So I started when Fusion and Prime came out. Just the series has been my favorite game series ever since. I've just played every release as they come out now. Super was a weird one because, it took until the Wii Virtual Console for this game to become more accessible again. And so that's where I played it. And I didn't have a Wii right when it came out because that's a whole different thing about not liking wiggle waggle horse crap that Nintendo was peddling back then. But I played it when I got a Wii in high school, so like towards the end of the Wii's life cycle. And I played Super Metroid. And it's the interesting perspective I have of playing the Game Boy Advance ones first and just other Metroids first, where Super Metroid was not a game that I particularly liked a ton, but we'll get into some of the reasons why later. But just that's my history with the series and everything. And I would have said I am by far the biggest Metroid fan in the room, but then I saw we got Doom and Crossing here tonight, and I know they're a very big fan as well. So I'll reserve that one. But that's my little primer there.
Nick, you go ahead.
All right, so this is the first time I've ever played Super Metroid. I don't have much experience with 2D Metroid because I did play half of Prime earlier this year. got stuck and stopped playing. Wanted to go back to it. My only experience other 2D Metroid is I played Fusion because it was included in one of the GBA games that Nintendo gave 3DS owners that bought it before
Ambassador
the
program.
price drop. Yeah. And I didn't get far. I was like 12 when that happened, and I didn't get far in it. I got stuck. So that's my experience with Metroid.
You know, I think you said this on the Discord. Is this true that you think that this is the oldest game you have ever beaten, Super Metroid?
Yes.
Okay. That's interesting. Is there anybody else? Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, so first exposure to Metroid was Wii Virtual Console. Played the original. Me and a buddy got really into it. And from there, I actually played the series in order. I got the Virtual Console version of Super Metroid, and I got a classic controller so I could still use a D-pad instead of the GameCube controller. So yeah, would have played Super Metroid for the first time around, I guess, 2011, something like that. From there, I decided I wanted to kind of go through all of the mainline series. And as a true Metroid fan, I recognize that the mainline series are only the Japanese ones, including Other M. So, got all caught up and played Fusion, Zero Mission, and Other M, and Other M right before Dread came out. So, played Dread, all caught up. Yeah, that's where I'm at. So, played it for the first time. Wii Virtual Console. Didn't grow up with it. Played it in high school, or no, right after high school.
God, I'd love to make everybody play freaking Other M sometime, but maybe another month. Doominhole, you go ahead.
Hey, howdy, Mike.
Hi.
Yeah, my story is very similar to Turbo Sean's. Thanks for the shout out there earlier. Where I pretty much got into Metroid because of Smash back in the early 2000s. I thought, wow, the Samus character looks pretty cool. And then sure enough, I saw Metroid Prime in a Blockbuster, took it home, and sure enough, that Samus character was kind of awesome. And so, yeah, Metroid has just been a huge part of my life ever since then. And then I also played Super Metroid when it came to the Wii Virtual Console, I believe like a week or two before Prime 3 came out. I believe that was part of the marketing campaign for that game. And I actually really did enjoy it at the time. And while it's not my favorite Metroid game, I have a huge love and appreciation for it. And there's, so much that I can't wait to talk about tonight.
Awesome. Jedi Moss, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, Jubilo just jogged my memory a bit. Yeah, my first exposure to Metroid was playing as Samus in Smash Bros. And she actually continues to be my main that I use in every Smash Bros. Game, including Ultimate. So there was that fun bit of trivia. I kept trying to get into Metroid several times, actually, over the course of, God knows, I guess around the 2000s when, Fusion and Prime were coming out. And I remember, what was it? I think it was Prime that had it in the game itself, like a copy of the original Metroid. So I tried that. I was a bit weirded out by the original Metroid. Tried to play all of the recent Metroid games that had come out during that time. Had a difficult time getting into them. It wasn't until I think the Wii came out, and I actually was able to get into the Prime series proper. So Metroid Prime was my entry into Metroid. Loved the Prime games. I went back later, probably during actually the Switch era is when I really started to get back into the 2D Metroid games and started really appreciating those. And that was when I played Super Metroid really in earnest for the first time, was when it got added to NSO.
All right, so let's really kind of delve into the game here. Let's just sort of hit on a bunch of different topics. I think the first one I want to start with is atmosphere. I think that's something you hear people bring up a lot when they talk about this game. There's a bit of story at the very beginning. You have a little bit of a Star Wars style text crawl almost. And you do your little thing on the space station. But then from there, everything is completely environmentally told. Not that there's much of a story necessarily. Anyways, you're looking for a baby Metroid. But still, just the way that is slowly told and the way it gets told, in a pretty epic, amped up fashion by the end is very memorable. But just all these different zones, the way that they each feel. You have music doing a lot here with just some really, again, atmospheric music that ranges from creepy. There's that do 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 do, which is just like one of like it gives me chills. That little jingle, I guess, like evil jingle, but all that stuff. But yeah, I guess I'm wondering, what do you guys think about the atmosphere of Super Metroid? Chuck, 1991. Please go ahead.
Yes, very excited for this question because that's the thing that hit me right away when I started playing it. Real quick, I forgot to mention, I only played through each game once, except for Dread. Dread, I got really hooked and played it a bunch. But last time I had played Super Metroid was years ago. So going back in, I forgot, like, the attention to detail. It feels like something that we get excited about even when a modern game does it. Like when you're first going down into like the remains of the Mother Brain fight from the first Metroid, like, and it's just the sound of thunder. Like the music hasn't kicked in yet. You could hear the thunder, and you know, then when you go down and you get the morph ball, and like, you know, it's just so it's. I was just amazed at the atmosphere. I forgot how well they did it, and to think like in 1994 they did that. You know what I mean? Like the visuals and the sound effects, and you know, just the way the music slowly fades in, and it's like, oh, now we're kicking into high gear here. It's incredible.
And you know, part of the cool thing about the atmosphere is how it makes me think of other NES to SNES sequels like Castlevania 4, which really was just a remake of Castlevania. And this, in some ways, is a remake of Metroid 1, but it is a sequel. But you are going to that same place, and it's doing some interesting stuff, especially in the beginning of showing you those areas from Metroid 1. You go down that path that you escaped from in the beginning. You see the original Mother Brain tank and things like that. And you see a bunch of familiar things as you go throughout the game. Duminal, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up something really interesting that I would love to talk about when it comes to Metroid in general, and that's the music. I have to talk a little bit about the NES title for a minute, but we'll bring it right back to Super. And that's because the original NES composer, Hirokazu Tanaka, had a really important philosophy, in my opinion, that really carries out throughout, I think, the most kind of the most musical, memorable titles in the series for a lot of fans, being that Tanaka-san wanted to take the music of that game and almost interpret it as if it were a living, breathing creature. And you can see that used throughout Super Metroid from the composers Minako Hamano and Kenji Yamamoto, as, you know, they take, you know, you have some orchestral sounding sound libraries that are used for the soundtrack, but then you also have other synth patches that almost mimic, like, you know, in-game sound effects or even real-life sound effects. And I think you can see this a lot, like in the title theme, for example, where you have these breathing noises that accentuate all the percussion. My own headcanon is I like to interpret that as the title screen being Ridley's POV after he slaughtered the scientists, and those breathing sounds are coming from him. So I think that's really cool. Or even the wrecked ship, after you power it on, you know, you have all of these intricate electrical signals and conduits and stuff that is reinterpreted into the instrumentation, and it almost like blends together. You know, it creates this fine line that separates the diegetic and non-diegetic worlds together, but brings them so close together to where they almost become one. And to me, like, that is what makes, you know, the music so powerful in this game, and why this atmosphere just pops and stand out so much.
I think that's interesting. Jedi, what do you want to add here?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I think Super Metroid is the template for Metroid, right? Like pretty much every Metroid game afterwards is, in some sense, emulating this. Like, this is the blueprint, right? I actually was playing Metroid Prime Remastered at the same time I was playing this. I was actually playing this Metroid Prime Remastered and Dread kind of all simultaneously, just to kind of see that evolution over time. And it is, Metroid Prime Remastered is much more of a one-to-one remake of Super Metroid in a sense. Just kind of more evolved into a three-dimensional plane.
It's very similar to what Ocarina of Time did with Link to the Past, where it really was kind of just taking that game, that formula, and making it in 3D. And it was one thing when they did it with Ocarina of Time. It was really cool when Metroid Prime did it, because a lot of people were worried we were just going to get Halo with a Metroid skin there.
Right, there was a lot less faith in Metroid Prime at the time. People were worried that it was not going to translate well, and surprised it did. But yeah, but just going back then to the atmosphere, yeah, it's like it's not just the music, it's like all the other like sound effects of monsters getting hit, of you using your weapons and using the environment around you, and like how even like some of the visuals, there's a lot of really weird stuff in this game that adds to that sense of unease in this atmosphere. Like, the fact that there's like blocks that shouldn't be there, blocks that disappear, enemies that suddenly show up, enemies that seem like ghosts at one point. Like when you're at the ghost ship, there's like ghosts that just pop in and out for no apparent reason. It's never explained, not really. And there's the boss there, but it is just a game that is oozing with atmosphere in a way that few games even today still are able to emulate. So yeah.
And I think part of that atmosphere is just the sprites and the graphics themselves. I always say Mega Man is probably my ideal 8-bit sprite. I think Samus in this game is the ideal 16-bit era sprite. Just love the way she looks, especially when she gets that Various suit. But just the color palette in general, it manages to be muted, but to not feel like, sometimes when games are muted, it can be dreary or ugly or uninteresting to look at. And this game does not have that problem. It's always gorgeous to look at. It's always interesting to look at. Sean, you go ahead.
All right, so a couple things to unpack here since we went through a few of them. But first of all, I did want to say you brought up like how this is sort of Metroid 1, but again, or redone, or however you want to look at it. And this is a conversation like we actually had with Jeff one time somewhere on a podcast, where that's sort of just what video games were back then, where it's almost like the arcade mentality of like, because we were talking about Star Fox and how like Star Fox 64, what exactly is it? And it's like, well, that's sort of how you did video games. Like we're doing Star Fox, so Star Fox is more Star Fox, so we're gonna do it again. So it's interesting that this is like the other Super Nintendo game that we're gonna look at when comparing these things. A Link to the Past. It does serve as that template, and it is very interesting, and it's almost funny how many times Metroid has gone back to Metroid 1, like Star Fox, but that's a bit of a tangent there. When it comes to the atmosphere, the main thing we're talking about here, so I streamed my most recent playthrough of the game for the club, and I believe my off-the-cuff like in the moment reaction was just the vibes are immaculate. Like the atmosphere in this game, I think, is still a thing that holds up by far the best about it, where everything it feels so desolate. So every Metroid game gives you a specific feel. Like obviously Fusion is straight up fear from the SAX. Dread is, once you know it, dread of the Emmys chasing you. That's literally why they called it that back in like 2006 or whatever. This game definitely gives you that sense of isolation, which does come a bit from Metroid 1, but I think it nails it in a way that, Metroid 1 would sort of be spun off into a different feel with Zero Mission, but Super Metroid retains this griminess that I love. Like everything's a little dingy. Like even unless you're looking at like, pixel perfect emulation and stuff like that, even if you like look on NSO app or a CRT or something, everything's gonna look like a little shady. Like the things are gonna blend together just right, and it looks fantastic still, I think. The music, on the other hand, is something that I think is extraordinarily well done, but not my preference for a soundtrack in a game, because it is very in the background for a lot of it.
It's not necessarily something that I pop up like all the time on my, like MP3 player back in the day, like a Mega Man for sure.
But
it's very effective in the game.
There are some songs that I think are like that, like Lower Norfair, the Ridley area, which would get turned into Magmore Caverns later on in Prime. Like, there are absolute bangers on the soundtrack, but for the most part it is more just ambient music. I'm trying to think of a better word to use there, but it's very good. It's just I do prefer the more like in your faceness that later Metroid
something a little bit more melodic, maybe.
Yeah, just something I can sort of like hum. Like I also played Zero Mission right before this recording, and I was like sort of like humming along the whole time. Like da 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 da, and
even on that terrible Game Boy Advance sound chip. Can I just say, like I get what people are right there. I always feel like that's a little overblown. The how awful everything sounds on the Game Boy Advance.
Well, and like I've explained to you before, it's like because they had to do everything in software on the GBA, it all came down to like how well did they how well did they adapt the music to what the GBA could do. That's why, like, you know, Pokemon from the time has such good music, because they knew it would be very harsh, so they used a lot of brass. But yeah, Zero Mission, different game. I'll bring it up in comparison a little bit sometimes because it is my favorite, but we're talking about Super right now. So
it's a similar game. They're both Zebus games. You say Zebus or Zebes?
Zebus.
Zebus. All right. Yeah. Nick, you go ahead.
Yes. So I don't have much experience with 2D games because the era I grew up was mostly 3D. So it's really hard to impress me in 2D because I'm so used to 3D. But I think this game really impressed me with its atmosphere, and I think it especially helps with the music. I do think it's very atmospheric, which can be kind of boring and forgettable, but I think it really works in here, and it makes, even though it's just in the background, I still think the music is memorable.
Yeah. And somebody brought up like that desolation feeling, or, you know, just like the desolation. And like that's so much of what makes Samus this memorable character, even though she doesn't say anything. She doesn't even really do anything except for what you make her do. But just they make the situation seem so kind of lonely and desperate and dangerous that you can't help but really become attached to this character. Randy, how about you go ahead?
I'll keep it brief because we've been on atmosphere for a long time. I think the lack of music was the most memorable thing to me. There are long stretches where you just hear nothing, and other than the sound effects of the game, which I thought was really effective. I like hearing the doors open with just the doors open. It sounds really impactful and kind of intimidating. This is one of the earliest examples I can think of off the top of my head where like a cinematic feeling is it kind of is taken seriously. And prior to this, Mike, you brought up Castlevania 4. They try where like, oh, you walk in there and the music's a little bit more downplayed, and you walk into the castle, there's no enemies, but that's like 30 seconds and then it just turns into a Castlevania game. Right. This one was like you have the whole intro and it's super atmospheric, and then you get to the planet and there's still no monsters there, and you're like, what the heck's going on? It takes forever. And the thing that gets me every time, I never remember it for whatever reason, but it gets me every time, is when you get the morph ball and that camera pops on and it's just like there's no reason for that other than to be like, hey, you're being watched. And that's not something video games traditionally did back then, is just to try to evoke that kind of emotion. It was always just like, we're going to blast you in the face with video game, and no, not today. You're going to it's a slow burn here, baby.
God, I love that moment too. Like, yeah, that Return the Jedi eye just looking at you, and it's like, and, it sees you. You kind of continue for a bit, and then at a certain point, when you backtrack, now the enemies are there. They know you're there. I love stuff like that. So yeah, let's move on from atmosphere here. Let's get to something I think quite a few people are anxious to talk about: controls. Let's talk about the controls. I often brag about being somewhat impervious to quote unquote bad controls. I've been playing Super Metroid for forever, so I have become used to the controls for a very long time. I don't remember having too much of an issue with them. There certainly are things that get improved later, specifically swapping between a bunch of different weapons. But Jedi Moss, I see that you're off mute. Why don't you start here?
Yeah, I'll just say, I came into Metroid relatively late and definitely played a bunch of the more recent Metroids before getting to Super Metroid. And yeah, are the controls as good as, say, Metroid Dread? No. But I still never really got frustrated with the controls. Like, I felt they controlled just fine to me. Part of that is just because I played a whole bunch of Metroid games before, so like I got most of the basics down. It does require a lot of very precise timing when it comes to doing those advanced moves, right? Of like the screw attack or the doing the wall jumps. Sometimes if you don't get the timing right, it ends up not working the way you want it to, and that could definitely be frustrating. I think the only time in which the controls kind of really frustrated me is really when you're in the sand, when you're down in the water level. Like the sand, I think the sand is the only time in which I actually got immensely frustrated with, like, why isn't this working the way I need it to be working?
I'll admit the sand doesn't feel great. It doesn't feel great trying to get out of that sand. I'll admit that.
Wisely, they moved away from that in later Metroid games, so that's that there. But yeah, I never really had an issue with the controls, and yeah, it's less precise and it's less. It doesn't feel quite as good as like something like Dread, but I thought it worked just fine.
Go ahead, Nick.
Okay, so I have to say, I did not think the controls were good, but I'm not going to compare it to the newer Metroid games because I haven't played those. I haven't played the newer 2D Metroid games, so I'm not going to compare them. But I just feel like the platforming, it does not feel good at all. The jump, especially, feels very floaty. Even the initial one that feels the least floaty feels too floaty for the type of platforming this game expects you to do. Like the jump is so floaty, and the platforms are so small sometimes that I keep falling into pits, keeps falling into the spikes. It just does not feel good. Like I don't feel like I have control about where I land most of the time.
There's like a weird intricacy with the game where if you kind of do more of a straightforward jump, then from there you have a lot more control. Once you start doing one of those spinny jumps, you can never sort of you have a constant momentum, and it can become harder to control then. So you do have to kind of, there's a learning curve there for sure. Sean, you go ahead.
Okay, so these are two things that I actually think of separately in my head, but I guess I'll just give them right back to back since that's what we're doing with this one. I think the controls, as in literally how you play the game, is fine. The problem is like you have to remap from the default controls. Like you definitely need to put toggle on a face button and cancel on a select button.
Right.
You have to like shuffle things around a little bit.
And you can't do that like in the game. It's not like you have to do that on hardware,
which is,
right? Like it has a, yeah.
It's fine.
Sure.
Like you do it in the options beforehand. Like, yeah, it's like, that's a small thing. But like once you get those like situated, they're fine for most of the game. A big point for me is like they feel cumbersome once you get a lot of tools in your arsenal, because like this game you cycle through all the tools that you have on a single button, which feels awkward to me, especially because, and this is where me being a huge fan of the GBA games in particular comes into play, because they definitely figured this out way later. And
with less buttons, too.
With less buttons, exactly, which is the ironic thing. They had 2 less face buttons to work with, so they had to streamline the controls. And so that's why I'm used to, which is where my criticism of the controls comes from. Because in the GBA games, you simply have like a look button where you just hold that and she looks up diagonally and you just press down and it goes down. Like I like the way that works. But the thing that I think we can all agree works better is there's a toggle button. So when you're just like, standing straight forward, you hold R, she primes her missiles. You release R, she stops priming the missiles in the GBA games. Super missiles, same thing. You just switch over, hold R or release R. Same thing with power bombs. When you're in Morph Ball, it's all contextual. In here, you have to like press a button and like go through, okay, I don't want missiles, don't want super missiles, don't want power bomb. Okay, X-ray visor, there we go. Or like grapple beam. They're all in that same list. That gets cumbersome later on. Like to start, it's fine. The bigger thing for me that I would critique is sort of what Nick was getting at. And weirdly enough, I didn't expect this going into this conversation. He feels even more harshly about it than I do. But the physics of the game. And it's just, I'm playing the game in 2023. I can't ignore games I played in the past. I'm not playing this in 94. I have to compare it to what I played. And the physics of the GBA games just feel a lot better to me because they are snappy. Like, I guess in this game, maybe they were going for like you're in space or something like that, because the neutral jump in particular is floaty. The somersault isn't as bad, but the neutral jump feels a little floaty. And when there are tiny platforms, which is also like feels like a Super Metroid specific thing, because I have played other Metroid games other than Zero Mission even recently. It feels like they sort of expanded them out a little bit so you can hit them a little bit easier. But it's all the tiny things that kind of adds up for me. Like, when I neutral jump, I can't press jump again to just somersault. That's something that they add later. Or
I do like that later, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good change. And then
I forgot that wasn't in this recent playthrough, and I did miss being able to go into a somersault from a neutral jump.
It's awkward. You can cancel out of a somersault, but you can't cancel into a somersault. It's a small thing, but yeah. And then I think you were there when I was talking about it, Mike, but so this is a weird meta thing. Space jump is what made me realize it, where slowdown influences how certain things work in this game. And so it's hard for me to tell now in 2023 when we're talking about this, is like Space Jump messed up in Super Metroid? Because I was playing on the NSO app and I was like, I feel like this isn't right. And then I like played it in another emulator without lag and with lag, and that's when I realized, oh, okay, so slowdown affects the timing of things, not just like your timing, but literally whether or not the system will accept certain inputs. And so I wish I had a Super Nintendo to test this on. I don't, so I won't like say definitively, but there's some funkiness there, and that's what irks me about Super Metroid the most out of anything, is just some of the funkiness in the physics and how things feel in comparison to the later games.
Nick, you wanted to say something else. I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, so I will say I did play it on NSO, and I do have the SNES controller for the NSO. And using that controller, I think the controls make sense if you're using that controller, specific controller, more than if you use like the Pro controller or like a Joy-Con. I will give it that. I think it feels fine for the controller it was made for.
Does anyone else have this pet peeve with all the NSO games where they make the bumpers the default LNR buttons instead of the shoulders? I have to go in this. I have like a profile in the system just to swap that because it drives me crazy every time.
That's what I did too during my playthrough, because it drives me up the freaking wall. No one uses L and R, the like L1,
No,
R1. Nintendo,
I had to do it for every SNES, every Game Boy Advance game. It drives me crazy every time. Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. The controls didn't bother me for the most part. The sand, I think we're all in agreement, was not ideal. I really had a hard time with that. I didn't quite figure it out. I just kind of brute forced my way through it. But for what they're trying to achieve, I think Samus is not Mario. She doesn't need to feel like Mario. If I want to play Mario, I'll go play Mario. She's a big, heavy, mech-suited bounty hunter chick in space where she's going to be floating around and doing weird spin jumps and kind of have a cumbersome jump in these tight corridors in this alien world. And I'm the outsider here. These people it's these aliens, it's their domain, and I don't feel comfortable here. And I feel like the controls lent itself well to that in the beginning, especially where you don't have any of your resources. And then as I don't want to say frustrated, but as I was getting tense, like trying to get up on these platforms, the punishment for missing a platform is you might lose 5 health, and you have a lot of health. Like, it's not a big deal to just jump back up there and once you get better at it. And then as you get better at it and you progress through the game and you get more and more items, you come back through that area that gave you a hard time before, and you're screw attacking and you're wall jumping your way. You feel awesome. You're like, yeah, screw you. You gave me a hard time at the beginning of this thing, but I've mastered your domain. This is my world now, baby. I really like that feeling. I don't think you can get that feeling if you just are a superhero right out of the gate, personally. And the same with the controls mastering the movements. I will somewhat agree with the wall jump. Originally, I should say, the first time I played it, I did have a hard time with it. This time it clicked with me instantly. I don't know what it is. I watched those little alien guys a little bit closer, and just for whatever reason, it worked really well for me this time. And I had no trouble with the screw attack either time. So I thought the controls lent itself really well to the what they were trying to achieve.
Yeah, some of this stuff's just going to be subjective. It's hard for me to say, well, I didn't have a problem with the controls. I mean, if you did, you did. It's fine. I do like to defend the wall jump a little bit, just because, like, one, it is this advanced technique that you actually don't need to use. And in fact, I think a lot of people's first playthroughs, they don't use it. I'm sure my first playthrough, I didn't use it very much. It's mostly for sequence breaking and for finding some extra missiles and other things like that, or maybe some shortcuts here and there. But I also do just like this wall jump. Actually, I like how precise it is. I like that it's difficult, and I like that when I get good at it, it feels really good to pull off. Jedi, I think, was up next. I'm sorry, I forgot the order wrong, but go ahead, Jedi.
Yeah, actually, I thought TurboShop brought an interesting point. Was I do wonder how much some people's issues with the controls comes down to the fact that we're not using the original hardware, and the result of using emulation and more modern hardware. I do kind of wonder if maybe it's causing some of this funkiness where it's not being run on the hardware it was intended to be used for. It's like a situation where it feels like 85 to 90% of what it felt like on the hardware, but it is that it's that uncanny effect then of where it just kind of feels a little bit off, perhaps. I don't know. I've never played it on the original hardware, so I can't say for certain. And last thing is, I actually, he brought. I know Randy brought up the good point too about the aliens, which I think was a fun, clever thing they do. Is the aliens are there to teach you some of those advanced techniques, right? When you come across those aliens, you come across the bird, and the bird is teaching you how to do the boost jump. And I think that's actually a clever bit of both tutorialization of the game and a bit of actual storytelling of the game, because it's done clearly, of course, within the atmosphere of the game itself. And I thought that was a clever bit of storytelling. And you have the little monkeys; they teach you how to wall jump and show you how you can use that, and it's great.
It was so funny when Jeff posted that video from Jedi Survivor where they do have the thing where like the little animals teach you how to do a wall jump. It's clearly a Super Metroid reference, and then he posted like, "Look, there's a Super Metroid reference," and all these people were like, "Wall jumping's not a Super Metroid reference." Like they didn't get it at all. He was so mad. That was the funniest thing.
I do wonder if it's completely possible some people might even not even found that section, right? Some people might have just completely.
Oh, a lot of people
finding those animals, yeah.
Oh yeah, a lot of people. It's easy to miss that. Duminal, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think I have anything new to add in terms of like other controller issues that anyone hasn't already brought up. I guess like most people have said, it's really just kind of up to the interpreter of what you will. For me, I definitely think in terms of controls, the biggest issue is probably that select button issue where you have to cycle through all your equipment. I will say though, after playing Tears of the Kingdom, like it could be much worse. I'll just say that on that end. But yeah, overall, yeah, I guess it just depends on the issue. It's a very steep learning curve, but while it's not my preference, once you do get the hang of it, there's some really cool tech that you can do with some of the advanced movement. But again, that's going, to be, very player determined.
Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, so sounds like I'm the only one here that played on original hardware. But so who knows, maybe my experience differs greater than I thought. But literally the first thing I did after landing on the planet, because I anticipated this being a sticking point, and I've heard over time that it's a sticking point, first thing I did was go to the right, wall jump up that wall, and go around to the other side where I wasn't supposed to be. Now, granted, you have to use a super bomb to get any further, so I couldn't get any further, but I hadn't played this game in years, and I was still able to wall jump just fine. I personally feel like the controls they work completely fine. I do agree. Yeah, like Dread, newer games, they do control better. If there was any hiccups I had, maybe this is just something I'm able to do, but I told myself it's a user error. Like if I wanted to press a button to switch to missiles and I pressed R instead of select, it's like, well, that's just because I now have the experience of, I'm going backwards. So it's like at the time, there would have been no reason for someone to be like, oh, clearly R would switch to missiles. I mean, and just a quick touch on like, okay, if Kiss came out today, hear me out. It's just a bunch of guys in makeup. Everyone knows what it is. It's just 4 dudes, and they're mostly singing about rock and roll and having a good time. In 1974, that was the scariest thing imaginable, especially to parents. People thought they were actually demons because context matters. In 1974, that was crazy. All that is to say that I judge this game because I'm not going to pretend the game came out in 2023 because it didn't. It came out in 1994. So if there's anything I forgive it to, maybe it's subconscious for me at this point, but like I don't expect it to play like a 2023 game. And that being said, I think it controls absolutely fine.
Oh wow. Okay. Randy, you first.
Well, I just wanted to add that I wasn't alive when Kiss came out, but I was alive when the Blair Witch Project came out. It was a similar deal where everyone thought that was the realest of the real thing, and we had to pay money to see these children get murdered. So,
Jedi, real quick.
Yeah, I had a brief question for Chuck. So I know you mentioned that you did play it on original hardware. Do you feel like there was a difference between that and sort of the emulated version? I'm just curious if you tried the emulated version and you were able to if you felt like there was a difference between the two.
Great question. I did not do an A and B.
If I could piggyback real quick, I'm just curious, Chuck, did you experience slowdown as well? Like, was that natural?
during like Ridley, second Ridley, I definitely experienced a little bit of slowdown, but overall, I don't think there was much. And you know, I didn't do like an A/B test because I do have that same virtual console version on my Wii still, but I don't have that hooked up. So I just played it on the original hardware. So again, like it is super duper possible that the reason I was able to, you know, do wall jumping immediately is because I'm using original hardware versus, you know, compensating for any sort of emulator input lag, blah, 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 blah. So definitely, you know, I wouldn't doubt that it gave me a different experience, but I didn't do like an A/B comparison to make sure of that.
Okay.
Oh, Sean, anything you want to say?
Yeah, I did have a point I want to bring up before we move on too far. Not in a combative way, but I just want to like bring up the point of like what we expect out of the game. I don't know if you want to get to that organically, Mike, but I guess I'll bring it up here. Where when I compare this game to a more modern game, the reason I do so is because I think that the best video games in history are the ones that do still hold up in the things that you are looking for in that game. So while, you know, Randy brought up the Mario comparison, sure, Samus shouldn't feel like Mario, but what she should feel like is she should feel like a good action platforming character, like X still does in Mega Man X to this day. Like if I go back and I play Super Mario Bros. 1 on the NES, the reason that's an all-time classic is because it still feels good as a Mario game even today. Same with all the way back to like Pac-Man in the arcade. Pac-Man still feels good as a simple arcade game.
So what you're getting at is that you don't think Super Metroid is an all-time classic in the way Super Mario Brothers or Mega Man X.
Well, I'm getting as Super Metroid is a terrible game. Everyone in here should feel bad. We should all pack up. No.
I knew it. Finally, we got so far.
We got them, boys. No, I think it's the approach that I'm coming at. It's, you know, I think that this game was a product of its time, and there's nothing wrong with that where it is a product of its time. It's just, you know, something being intentional does not mean it's good. You can throw marinara sauce at a canvas. I'm not going to say it's a good painting. I'm not going to say it's bad either, because art is subjective. And I think, you know, we look at these things subjectively with our own collective opinions. But that means that when I look at Super Metroid, I'm like, things could have been improved, which is why, even though this is a really good game, there are aspects I think don't hold up. And that's where I think, you know, Mike, sometimes you don't like to say it, but like aging, when a game ages, I think that's something that we need to look at when we are criticizing
maybe it's just hard for me because like I played these games generally, you know, throughout my life, and I kept playing old games. So I just have never gone back to an old game like, oh, I forgot it used to be like this. So I don't know.
And to you, it's going to be like second nature, especially if you played a crap ton of Super Metroid first. You're not going to be like, oh yeah, you know, this thing, I don't like it, or even saying that's bad or whatnot. It's just.
But I also still think I think I'm still right in that the game control's fine. But hey, again, it's subjective. What are you going to do? Randy, I'll let you have one more word here, but then I want to move on to a different topic.
I mean, if you don't like the controls, I'm not going to change your mind. But when it comes to expectations, I try really, really hard, and I think I'm pretty good at keeping my expectations kind of non-existent when I go into a game. I want the game to set the expectations for me, and that's why I think Super Metroid worked really well for me, because it's like the controls wasn't the first thing I noticed. It was the word of the day, atmosphere. It was the isolation. It was by that point, I didn't think it was an action platformer. I thought it was like an exploratory isolation adventure game. I didn't really think of it as a precision platformer. Never once did I. When I fell off, I didn't think like, oh, I lost. I thought, no, oops, I slipped, and I just get back up there because it's not a big deal. And I think the controls lend itself to that. I had this was my main problem with Tears of the Kingdom when we talked about it, is that they set my expectations as this build it, solve a puzzle kind of game, and it turned into Breath of the Wild again. And I had mentioned that was a problem. I got through it by the end of it, but I go into every game willing to hear it out, and it set the stage for me by saying like, no, this is the kind of experience you're gonna have, and if it's not your bag, that's fine, but this is the feeling we want you to have. And I thought the controls worked for that personally.
Let's talk about the map, the exploration itself. this is not the first game like this, but in a lot of ways, this kind of becomes the formula for these kind of non-linear exploration-based 2D games, which we would later call Metroidvanias. I think it's interesting how the game guides you in a way that you sort of do this circuit in the beginning. You start on your ship, and there's a little bit of backtracking here and there, but generally you do a full circuit, getting a lot of power-ups and fighting a couple of bosses before you sort of make it back to the surface a different way, and you're at your ship again. And then from there, it opens up a lot in terms of, well, what am I supposed to do next? And that's, the classic Metroidvania formula of you're exploring to progress, but you're also finding upgrades, you're finding more missiles, you're finding more health containers and all these other things as you're doing that. I have enjoyed the exploration a lot. I'm not going to pretend that back in the day, I also didn't get so stuck that I would also look online just to find out where to go next. Happens Metroidvanias all the time. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. It took me, as a kid, I did not know that you could use the super bombs to blow up that glass tube. So that one had me stuck for a while back when I was a kid. The nice thing about going back to this game every few years is, of course, I don't remember everything, but I generally remember enough that it's pretty hard for me to get impossibly lost anymore. But Jedi Moss, what do you think about the map, the kind of navigation, the sort of level design?
So two things actually. One is the actual map itself, and then the overall method of exploration. I actually think the overall method of exploration is top notch. I know we use the term a lot, Metroidvanias. The term I actually like to use a lot is the term search action, which I think is the actual sort of genre that this is. Because when you go into a room, you're always expected to search the room and keep blasting at things, seeing what sort of secrets you could find in the room. And I think Metroid, as a franchise, consistently does that very well. I think, I think some of people's issues with that formula, I think, comes down to, well, there's no real obvious clue a lot of times to a room might have a thing. I think you kind of have to get out of the mindset of there's going to be no obvious tell. You just kind of have to start fidgeting your way into the room and seeing what you can find. Now the map itself.
Well, yeah, I would say you do pick up on some things eventually.
Right.
As the more you play, you kind of realize there are no real dead ends. So if something seems like a dead end, it's probably not. But there's even just a little block that's out of place sometimes. Sometimes that means something. But yes, sorry, go ahead.
And then the actual map itself, I actually think, is the element that has kind of not aged great in the game. I think the map is fine, mostly, but that is the one where I'm like, oh yeah, you look at the map of Dread, Dread tells you a lot more information, because the map doesn't really tell you whether you've collected all of the items that you're looking for, how many items you've collected. It's not really giving you any of that information.
The hardest thing is that the map doesn't actually show you where the doors are, and that's definitely something that is a much welcome addition in later games here. But yeah, you don't know if you've collected an item in the room, or if there's an item there, you don't know what kind of door, let alone doors at all. So yeah, the map is just definitely, you can tell, a first pass at that idea of this in-game Metroidvania map.
Yeah, a reason why it took a long time for me to eventually get to 100%, sort of item collection, is because you don't know if you've actually collected every item. You're just kind of supposed to I guess, infer based on how many of the energy, the dots that you have, and infer how many missiles you have. There's no real obvious tell. The game tells you oh, you've collected everything now.
Yeah,
so
that's true. Sean, go ahead.
So, yeah, I think this is two halves of a whole here. And this is actually the last of 3 bullet points I really wanted to hit, because it's as great as the game is as a whole. It is the last of third things that I think are a problem to some degree. Because controls, physics, map. And as you guys brought up, the mapping system itself, very archaic, and it's very rough to go back to. We were actually talking about this through my stream chat while I was playing, and this was actually, I was surprised we totally agreed on, seemingly, where this is old school, it's the auto mapping version of an old school dungeon crawler, where you kind of basically just are using a pencil to mark things in on graph paper, essentially. That's how basic the map is in here, which is frustrating because you don't know, okay, even something as simple as there is a power bomb door here, which, you would eventually use to signify I haven't been to this area yet. That's, like you said, a much welcome addition in layer games. But it is also, like you said, a first pass at it. It's fine enough, I guess. But there's also some things that I'm like, okay, correct me if I'm wrong, because I couldn't figure this out organically. It didn't bother me enough to actually look up. Can you actually like zoom out to and pick a different section of the map in Super?
I think I tried to do it this most recent playthrough and I could not. I think you might
because you can in other.
I'm not 100% sure either.
Yeah, you definitely can in other Metroids, but I'm pretty sure you can on Super.
I thought you could, only because I remember when I first got like the first map data, I remember being surprised at how much that gave me. Like it showed like the wrecked ship. And I'm like, why is it showing me that so early? So to me, that seems like I must have been able to zoom out, but I don't know. Maybe that was they just show you the wrecked ship when you get your first map data. I don't know.
And they show you that larger map every time like you reload.
Yeah, when you load the game up, you see the actual like overworld map basically. But okay.
That's
anyways, right. But the other half of this is like the physical planet of Zebus, where I think that is still really well done, and it's something that you addressed, Mike, where you said it was like a circuit. And I think that's a great way of playing it, because one of the problems with Metroid 1/0 mission is that there's a lot of slingshotting. And even Fusion kind of has this problem where it's like, wait, what do you mean I need to go back here? I was just there. And it's like, oh, lore reason, like something blew up there, so you need to go back. It doesn't feel great in practice, whereas I couldn't tell you what the shape actually is, but it in my mind at least, Super Metroid almost feels like figure 8-ish, which I think is a much more organic way of like, yeah, you're going to go back through some areas to get to somewhere you've never been, but you're also going to be very much seeing new paths and new corridors and everything. So I do think that Super still nails that in a way that some of the other Metroids don't.
Go ahead, Nick.
All right, so I think that the exploration and the map are probably my favorite part of this game. I just like going through it the first time, not really having much, and going in back later when you have more power-ups and be able to do more things, like, oh, there was this thing right here that I couldn't get to. Now I can go get it. And I told Sean this, but my favorite item in the game was the X-ray scope. I just really liked going into each room, scanning, trying to find all the missing things, like, oh, this wall that I thought was just a wall, I can actually blow it up and find something, or it leads to somewhere I was. It's like a shortcut now. I think that was cool, and that was probably my favorite part of just running around trying to find hidden stuff.
Yeah, shout out to the X-ray scope and the spider ball, the two most optional items in the game, but are a lot of fun. Duminol, go ahead.
Well, actually, I think you mean the spring ball. The spider ball is from Metroid 2 there, Mike.
Oh, I'm such a
fake fan.
God, get this man out of here. Boom.
Spider ball in Metroid 2 is kind of annoying because it's like now I have to explore every roof too. Are you kidding me? They improved that at Metroid Prime. But yes, I meant the spring ball. Excuse me.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. I'm actually going to echo a lot of Jedi's points about both the map and exploration, because I feel like we're both on the same page there, where, I feel like the map, it's certainly fine at the time, but, there's been a lot of really good quality of life improvements that's been made to the map since then. One thing that wasn't mentioned, though, was the addition of the pinning system, or the bookmarks feature from Metroid Prime 3 and the Mercury Steam titles as well, which I think are really great for newcomers, who might not have the intuition to remember stuff from like way earlier in the game. That way they can always just look in the map and like, oh yeah, there was that one thing that I encountered like a couple hours ago. I should probably revisit that now. Having something like that, I think, especially in the context of Super Metroid, would be really helpful for newer players. That being said, the actual exploration and the progression, I think, is absolute perfection. The gold standard of Metroidvanias, in my opinion, even above Metroid Prime, which is my all-time favorite video game. Just the way that this game escalates. It starts out very, very self-contained and actually surprisingly linear if you're going down the intended path, which isn't a word you would think of when talking about Super Metroid. But yeah, when you're going down the intended path, there's actually like a lot of gates that will lock you off. You go through Green Brinstar, and there'll be like a one-way gate that after you pass, you can't go back. And then you go to Red Brinstar, and you fall down a giant shaft, that normally you'd have to get the ice beam before you can make your way back up there. And so you still have the training wheels at first, but then after you get the power bombs and you go back up to Crateria, that's when the training wheels come off and the game basically goes, all right, we're not railroading you anymore. We're done like closing the exits behind you from this point. You can go anywhere you want at this point. It's all up to you. And I absolutely love that freedom that the game gives you. But then at the same time, again, like you also have the option of, carving your own path and just completely negating the game's rules if you want, whether it be intentional or unintentional sequence breaks. And just in even Metroid Dread, I really like that approach, but I feel like that game, it railroads your progress a little bit too often, even because in Super Metroid there's that halfway point. Dread doesn't really have that. It kind of does that to you until the 100% item sweep. So that's my thoughts on all that.
Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, to echo kind of what Sean was saying, and what a lot of people have been saying, I think the exploration, kind of the map layout, is great, and it really made me realize that similar to Dread starting at the bottom, Super Metroid starting at the top, having that point of like, okay, you always know where like the top, where the home base, so to speak, is. And yeah, the first Metroid, it's like you're going all over the place. It's really hard to kind of get this is my central location. And kind of like what Sean was saying with the figure 8 thing, I was thinking of it kind of like a pair of brass knuckles. Like there's a bunch of little loops and then there's kind of there's still like that solid top. And then there's a bunch of loops. Maybe the middle finger is extended a little bit going down to fight Ridley, but it's like a lot of loops that kind of come back on like the whole the top part as a whole, the surface. And also I was really interested to see what Nick would think, since this is his first time playing it, because I've played it once before, so there was definitely stuff I remembered about where things were big picture. So hearing that Nick also found the map and exploring it to be pretty intuitive is I thought that was cool, just knowing that okay, it's not just me remembering where things are.
Yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised. I thought this was going to be a lot of people complaining about getting lost too much. All right. Jedi, you were off mute for a while. There's something you wanted to say. Didn't want to pass you up.
Yeah, just one quick thing. But it is funny how the exploration of Super Metroid today still, I think as Doomino Crossing, mentioned it, I think it still is the gold standard for Metroid to this day. Because even with like Dread, my small little complaint about Dread is that I think it kind of does railroad you too much. It becomes a little too linear, where it very is clearly putting you on a certain path at certain points. And it feels weird, and it does feel a little bit weirdly compressed in that sense. But that's just an overall minor gripe with Dread. I kind of hope maybe with a sequel they can kind of make it a little bit more loose-ended, kind of like the way Super Metroid is.
And my kind of small gripe with Dread's map is that like the teleporters feel a little bit like cheating to me, right? It's not like this fast travel system. It's just like this kind of like here this teleporter goes to this teleporter, and it kind of feels like a way to cheat to make a map like this all make sense, where here it's a lot more organic. You don't need a kind of gimmick like that. Go ahead, Sean.
I want to complain about getting lost, Mike.
All right, here we go.
Right. No, I think I completely forgot to bring this up until I think Doomnal said something. Because I think they said, the markers that you can put on the map in like the Mercury Steam games and everything. I was thinking while I was playing the game, and then just now when we were talking about the mapping system, I was like, oh yeah, that was the other thing that I wanted to at least sneak into this conversation somehow, because I've been saying it elsewhere for a long time. I wanted to make sure I get in here. It's just, getting lost is fine in an exploration game. I think it's more of a reminder of, oh, hey, you haven't explored here. And because the mapping system, I'm trying to say, is subpar, it's hard to remember exactly where to go, because if you can't zoom out to the overworld map, and you can't, pan around too much and everything, it's like, so how do you remember where to go next? And here's the thing, you don't. And so
Or you buy a copy of Nintendo Power.
Exactly. Like Theo just brought up in the chat here, and she's bringing up while I was streaming it, like there's that specific element feels like, just buy a strategy guide if you don't, if you're worried about the map. It's like, oh no, yeah, that's a 90s thing. I just want to say, I do think that the Metroid series has experimented with this in interesting ways. Fusion is way too much, obviously, where Adam literally tells you where to go, how to get there, what's wrong, so on and so forth. Way too much. Even Dread, since Adam's back, does it a little too much. Prime and Zero Mission have basically the same system. I think Zero Mission is the best implementation, where all it does is, like, in mostly optional areas, it's only required if you are going to a completely different section of the map and the game wants to tell you that. But all they do is they go to your map screen, they zoom out, they go to the area you need to go, and they just drop a pin. There's no arrows flashing in this direction or that. There's no, like, Forza style racing line for you to follow or anything like that. Nope, it's just like, hey, you haven't been to this area of the map yet. If you get the map data, you'll see where you need to go. But also that's optional. So just, hey, head over here. And I think that's the type of thing that this game is sort of missing. It's just a reminder, especially if you're going to quit playing and come back later. Just something, the game telling you in some way, whether it's forward or passive, just, hey, go over here.
All right, we've been going for over an hour here, but there's still some things we want to talk about. I'm going to have one more topic for us, and then I'm going to go to some of their text submissions, and we can wrap up here. But I want to talk about bosses, and it kind of ties into the ending also, if you want to talk about that here. This is one of my favorite parts of the game. These bosses are all really interesting encounters. A lot of them are giant sprites, which was really fun back then, but still really cool now. You even have kind of one of, like, the first, like, quick kills, and it's not like a cheat. They built in this quick kill with this one boss where you can use your grappling beat to, like, electrocute yourself a bit, but really kill the boss. Ridley is so interesting in this game because Ridley is actually difficult. All these other bosses, once you kind of figure it out, it's not too bad. Even for the whole series, where there isn't a ton of hard boss fights, Ridley in this game can be tough. It's a war of attrition. It's kind of a check to see, hey, have you collected enough missiles and super missiles and health tanks? Especially in speedrunning, it can be something of a barrier because, you want to get there as fast as you can. You got to make sure you collect at least a decent amount of stuff just to get through that fight. So I love all the bosses in these games. It's fun how, like, you don't even have to fight all of them necessarily to beat it. Really cool stuff there. Nick, what do you think about the sort of boss situation here?
Oh, this is probably my worst part of the game. I think the bosses are mid at best.
Wow.
So I think they're really either too easy, and you could suss out what their problem pretty easy, like the very first one, and the boss where you just push them back and back and back until they get into lava. It's like, when I thought that boss, I was like, oh, is this it? Like, is there going to be a second phase where he's hard? He's like, nope, that's just it.
Yeah, but then it comes back as a skeleton, and it's so cool.
Yeah, but it's not part of the boss. It's just a freak out.
Yeah, it's the best freak out ever, but fair enough.
Justice for Crocomire.
Yeah, Justice for Crocomire. That dude was a skeleton and still tried to come at you. I gotta respect it.
I thought most of the boss fights designs were very unmemorable. Like, for the final two bosses, I thought Ridley was really hard. Like, you couldn't barely dodge his attacks, and he did a lot of damage each attack. I don't like doing this usually, like, with bosses, but I used a lot with that boss. I used the rewind function on SO, where if I was final hit, I would just rewind a couple of frames to dodge each attack.
Getting Jesse.
And so I did that. I don't usually like doing that, but I didn't feel bad because I just felt like that boss just had way too much health and dealt too much damage that was very hard to dodge. And I want to complain.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I want to complain about the final boss.
Okay.
I think the most part is fine. It's till you get to the very end where he gives that one final attack that you can't dodge, and you can die to that, which I thought was very dumb and really hurt my feelings towards that entire fight.
I'm surprised you could die to that. I didn't know that was the case.
It's like, I think that's really dumb. Like for most other games where you play where the final boss does a desperation attack, that's where like you can't die at all. Like it's impossible to die to that. But this one, the desperation attack, they can't dodge, can't kill you. So it's kind of a punishment for getting hit too much. It's like I felt like that wasn't fair.
Were you really low on health or something at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought that was not fair, and it didn't. It was just like, oh, you have like one energy tick left, and pretty much done. Like you can't do anything about it.
But Nick, I gotta ask you, because you gotta understand that in the day, this was considered the most emotionally beautiful of all video game endings at the time, with the surprise of the baby being grown and almost killing you and realizing who you are, then coming in and saving you and sacrificing. Like this was considered the epitome of the gaming medium for a while. I gotta know, Nick, if it moved you.
No.
Damn it.
Damn it. I just didn't like I thought the bosses were a low point of this game.
Okay. All right. Jedi, go ahead.
Well, I do like the bosses quite a bit. And I will say my favorite one is probably the Dragon fight, the sea creature in the underground, because I did not know this until very recently, is that you could kill him by using the grappling beam and sucking like one of the energy orbs on the side of the map.
Right, that's the quick kill. That's super neat.
Yeah, I was like, that is such an interesting little touch, and there's lots of little interesting touches like that. And it's funny how the Dragon fight, you don't even really know you're going into a boss fight. You just go into that room, and all of a sudden the boss music starts playing, and you kind of are caught off guard as doing that. So that one is probably the most memorable fight I had.
Real quick, Beefhammer in chat just said this was The Last of Us, and that made me laugh because it's true. It's true.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, the crocodile fight was also very good. Again, I like that it becomes a skeleton, and like that's a fun touch to the end. Like there's lots of like little nice touches to the boss fights to where they are. I do think they're quite memorable. And one quick thing. Since we can also talk about the ending now, right? Can we talk about the ending?
That's coming up now too.
Okay. Did you save the babies?
Oh, I saved those animals in both runs, even that one I was going under 3 hours. Like once you know where the animals are,
right? It's not that far. There.
Yeah, Sean was cutting it close on his, but he still did it. He was a good boy.
I didn't know the way out, but yeah, I still had to go for it.
Yeah, it's actually still one of my favorite escape sequences. These games, I think it's a pretty cool, because you do have a bit of like you're doing the old bit from Metroid 1. There's some new things you're doing. Then you have that weird optional save the animals thing, and then I always like am dashing and I jump onto the ship at the end and like kind of land right on the hatch, and it feels so good.
It's funny though how the Mother Brain fight is kind of a nothing fight. It's obviously a very scripted moment too. Like you're supposed to lose the fight and then win the fight. The actual boss fight is escaping the planet.
Right. Again, Ridley's the real kind of check more so than Mother Brain is. Sean, go ahead.
Okay, I had to step away when Nick said the bosses are mid at best. Is that the hottest take we've had so far?
I think it's the hottest take. Well, I'm more upset that he wasn't emotionally moved by the sacrifice of the baby.
The baby.
But what can you do with
Nick? You emotionless child.
What can you do?
Anyways, I do want to say though, I do think the bosses aren't. They're not mid at best, but I think they might be a bit mid overall. Because not every Metroid game needs to be Ridley, Kraid, Mother Brain. Although spoiler, they're all in here. My issue is like I felt there was a lack of super memorable boss fights outside of those. Maybe it's because I'm a Metroid fan, and so I see those bosses and I'm like, oh hey, it's you. But at the same time, like Mother Brain's transformation at the end, it's like, oh hey, you didn't see that coming. That's kind of cool. And so I think the rest of the bosses are a bit hit or miss for me. I think the one that I actually like the most outside of the big ones is actually Crocomire, who isn't even technically one of the big four.
Yeah, he's not one of the statues.
He's not one of the statues, but he's one of the more interesting fights because you can't beat Crocomire, and the game doesn't tell you this. In no way are you aware of this. You just have to figure out, oh, I'm not fighting him. I'm fighting the environment right now, and that's really cool to me. Especially
playing
when
Fall Guys with him.
Exactly. You gotta, sumo him out of the ring, as it were. And then at the end, what happens to him is like, oh my god. So that's really cool. I just wish there was more imaginative stuff like that. Like, you look forward to stuff like Nightmare and Fusion, but even if you look back, I think like the Omega Metroids and Metroid 2, like they have cool ideas, and I think Super was a decent amount of, here's an enemy, here's the eyeball, hit the eyeball. It's a little whatever.
Compared to like the mechanics we eventually get with Razorbeak and Metroid Dread, right? Like this is obviously
Ravenbeak, yeah. But
I always say What did I say?
Razorbeak. I mean,
Razor.
to be fair, Razorbeak is a pretty cool name, but yeah, even
that's a sponsor.
Razorbeak is Razorbeak a bad guy from Darkwing Duck? Oh my god.
Isn't that powering up flying type moves in like Gen 2 Pokemon?
I think you're right.
Yeah, something like that. Okay.
Oh god.
Oh, nerds.
There's maybe not, but there's something like that. Now I'm worried. No, that's Steelbeak. Okay, thank God. I'm okay. Duminol, go ahead.
Yeah, so I really like the bosses in this game. They're nowhere near my favorites in the series. That would probably go to either Prime 2 or Dread. But yeah, I still really like what this game offers. There's not any real puzzle boss fights, which are typically my type of favorites. The Ridley fight especially, my co-host on the Omega Metroid podcast, Andy Spiteri, he always likes to describe that as a bare knuckle bar fight, which is kind of the vibe I get with a lot of the boss fights, and I kind of like it. You're not meant to like, time dodge these enemy attacks, or like, figure out a specific ability that you have that can get to its weak point. No, it's just you're just exchanging blows until one of you guys is pass out. And I kind of like that, and that's why this Ridley fight is like one of my all-time favorites. The Mother Brain fight, I'm not gonna lie, this might be my spicy take. The fight itself and the story elements are really good. I absolutely hate the Mother Brain design. I think it looks so goofy.
You don't like
I much
Mother
prefer
Brainosaurus Rex?
Yeah, not a fan of the giant chicken Kaizu Mother Brain. I much prefer Brain in a tank, which still goofy, but I think it works in the context of Metroid. The only thing that fight is missing is an internal monologue by Samus explaining precisely what she's feeling. So that way I could actually understand what's going on. I mean,
Yeah, talking about her trauma or something. Let's see. Next we have Chuck. Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, just want to say that Dragon had a family. Feel bad for killing their mom in front of those kids. I didn't know they were in the room. Right. I would have maybe
I do remember that.
done things differently, but yeah, I definitely, I like the bosses. They definitely aren't really like puzzle heavy, more just all out attack focused. And I get it if someone thinks they're not like super great or like the highlight of the game, but you want to talk about classics, Super Mario Brothers. Those boss fights suck. So I want to just talk about games that don't hold up.
Wow. Okay. Jedi, go ahead, and then we're going to move on here.
Yeah. Just a couple more notes. I do want to mention Kraid because I think the thing about Kraid that people forget is like I'm sure that like when you were playing that in 1994 when they came out, and you're like you first see the little tiny Kraid, which I always find funny. It's like here's a little fake boss you try to kill first, and then you go into the room, and then there's actual Kraid there, and it's like this massive. It's a massive enemy that takes up like several like points of the room. I think that's probably mind-blowing for a lot of people because it's probably like one of the first times where you see an enemy that big on your, in a game like that. And so I'm sure that blew a lot of people away when they saw that for the first time. And yeah, it just I just remember too. Yeah, when you kill Dragon, the little babies carry away its corpse. And that's a very interesting touch that it have with Dragon. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Super last thing.
Sean,
super last
real
thing.
quick.
Yeah. Well, first of all, that's totally a reference to Metroid 1, where Kraid is the actual size of Samus, and they were showing off, hey, we can make Kraid be 3 screens now. That's awesome. Anyways, I just want to get in real quick because I don't know if it was brought up when I stepped away, but I saw Theo's comment. I like Ridley being a challenge. I like Ridley feeling like the threat that he is in the lore. And so even if the patterns aren't super challenging, I do like that he puts up more of a fight than he does when he's just a jobber in every other game.
Okay. Sean, I want you to open up these text messages too, because after I do this first one here, I'm going to run to the restroom and you're going to take over for a second if you don't mind. But I do want to get to this one from Giggy64. Said, just wanted to drop this here, and look at, there it is. It's a snippet of EGM 150 where they rank the top 100 games of all time, and guess who's number one? Okay. There it is. I remember this issue. This issue might be part of why I got gamer brained into being like, yeah, everybody thinks Super Metroid is the greatest video game of all time, like I do, because this like stuck with me. I remember reading this and being like, this might have been why I did finally play it, even because this probably would have been around when I first played it, and I was like, yeah, that's right, actually. Like, this is the best video game ever. So thank you, Giggy, for bringing up my, oh gosh, I gotta find that issue because it's I love my EGM. But once in future, Jason L, Sean, do you mind?
Sure. I'll take this here. They say, I'll start off with Randy's prompts from the other day. Made her shout to him for striving to keep things thoughtful, productive, and positive. He posed the questions, what experience is this game trying to give me? Does it succeed for me, and why not? Do I like it if it does succeed, or despite it not succeeding? I feel that's trying to convey a tense, maybe scary adventure, to make me feel a sense of accomplishment for unlocking power-ups, defeating enemies, and figuring out where to go. Getting stronger does feel good, at least briefly, but that sense of accomplishment is diminished significantly by the frustrating controls and unintuitive exploration, which both points that we all got to in one form or another. I won't continue to beat the drum about the wall jump or neutral jumping, but they did greatly lessen my enjoyment of the game. The only real tension I felt through any of it was, is this the game failing here or me? And it seemed to be an even 50-50 split. I'll admit I had to look at a guide or two to figure out where to go, but without them, I would have dropped the game pretty early on. The combat never felt bad, but it didn't begin to feel good until I got the goofily named Spazer Beam, or the Wave, whichever came first. And it is the Spazer. Wave is what makes beams go through walls. I'll end by listing some things I liked about the game. The atmosphere was neither tense nor scary, but was still fun and interesting. Bosses were all neat puzzles. The ending actually surprised me. It was fun to go through the game that spawned a genre, seeing things that have been copied or iterated through the almost 30 years since it came out. Overall, Super Metroid, I thought, was a good, solid game that I'm glad I played through, but without the nostalgia for it, I wouldn't put it anywhere near top games of all time list, unless you're strictly talking about historical significance, which I think is, in part, and me, Sean, speaking, I think is in part how I feel about this, even if it's maybe a little harsher than I would put it. Is Mikey all back, right, or should I keep going?
I'm back. Did you read one?
Yep, we're on Beef Hammer now.
Beef Hammer. Oh, good. I know he likes this game. Beef Hammer says, evening Game Club members, and also Sean thinks Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are better than Super Metroid.
No, I did not. Shut this man up.
And Mike, more disgusted by that opinion than by Apple's naughty. I am here to back up my fellow children and let you all know that Super Metroid does have major issues. It makes every other game come before it seem like garbage. Every game that has come after it, embarrassed for not having a better ending sequence. It reveals some disgusting people that don't even save the animals. Outside of that, I think Super Metroid is a masterpiece, and it's completely fair to still be considered the best game ever made. The children may not know this, but this game is 24 megs, the largest SNES game at the time. This was basically our Elden Ring. Imagine getting to play this game and then having to stomach Earthworm Jim when it came out a few months later, and your mom bought you it for Christmas. Hey, look, some of us liked Super Metroid. Actually, back then, I was only playing Earthworm Jim. Oh, no. Controls were the dominant topic going into the discussion. My take is that it controls perfectly well. I may prefer Dread and think it's tighter, wink, but that's expected for something 30 years newer. Super isn't bad in comparison. I think nothing of it if a game released and felt like this today, because I find the controls to feel natural. Controls are subjective, but I do think it's weird to claim that it controls poorly when Super Metroid was a pioneering speedrunning game where precise controls are one of the most important parts of a game. I think I will hand Mike his rare W today for being on the right side of history, and will give Super Metroid another one. Extremely common W's. I will say, this didn't turn into some kind of weird, the children versus the millennials thing that I was worried about. I think everybody was very gracious, even the people who weren't totally with us boomers who think this is the greatest game of all time. So I think we were able to have a good conversation and not just have it divulge into arguing about wall jumping for 90 minutes. So thank you, everybody. But here's
What happens when you don't try to shut us up.
Funny how that works, huh?
Octo says, I prefer Fusion and Zero Mission. Well, okay. Armored Wolf 5 says, I'm 21 years old and played Super Metroid for the first time 4 years ago. The controls complaint never made sense to me because you get used to them in like 20 minutes. Still an amazing game that's worth going back to with a happy grub face. Randy, who, by the way, had to make an exit at some point here, said, gotta tag out. But my final thoughts, I have no nostalgia for Metroid as a series. I felt the game did a good job telling me what was expected of me, and I was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. I think the things it does well, atmosphere, exploration, sense of empowerment, would be undone and or forgettable if it's just played like every other game. We didn't get to talk about, but the subtle environmental storytelling, how it showed and rarely told, was masterfully done by any metric. I enjoyed it in 2018. I enjoyed it again today. In 1994, it would have blown my mind. You can totally see how it's a lot of people's number one favorite game. P.S. The baby Metroid sacrifice made my wife cry. Aw, there you go. That's the way. See, Nick, that's how you're supposed to feel things. Gerbear says, this was my
nothing.
This is Gerbear says, this was my second playthrough, Super Metroid, having first played it last year, so my experience was naturally colored by having experienced some of the titles that's inspired. The core experience still holds up for me, despite a few pain points I'm sure haven't mentioned to stage. The amount of stuff we think of as gaming tropes I now recognize as coming from Super Metroid made this all a worthwhile experience. The storytelling is really effective considering just how little of it there actually is. There's a handful of cutscenes, but doesn't get in the way at all. Has any other Nintendo character received a glow-up to match the treatment Ridley got here? Obviously, the other returning bosses got a makeover as well, but this is the game where Ridley truly became the Metroid villain to such an extent that he was the obvious choice to become a Smash Brothers. A dubious honor in my eyes, but oh, well, wow. By the way, I was so excited when they finally announced Ridley. I was one of those people who was begging for Ridley for, like, since Brawl. When Brawl was coming out, I was hoping they were going to add Ridley. Everyone's like, Ridley's too big. Yeah, it was the stupidest thing ever. But they did add Ridley, and it turned out it was awesome. Gerbear continues. He gets the big entrance at the start of the game where he steals the baby Metroid, and you know just who is waiting for you once you start to finally explore Lore and Warfare. A build you don't get with other bosses. To a certain extent, beating him almost feels a little like beating the real boss of the game, as you then get the final upgrade to really make you feel like you have conquered this world. It's a very digital game. I've sort of gotten used to playing retro titles using an analog stick, but this one is one that demands a D-pad. To sum up, playing Super Metroid in 2023 is sort of like reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in 2023. There are sections of the experience that have aged, and that aging having been highlighted just a little bit more just by the many fantastic works they have inspired. Most importantly, that doesn't mean the classic has now been superseded to such an extent that's only a museum curiosity. I see Matt is typing something, so I'll keep an eye here, Matt, to see if you finish that. But I do want the rest of us to get into final thoughts here. There's a lot of us, so let's not all go too long here. We are reaching almost 90 minutes. But yeah, just final thoughts on this game. I think we were able to cover a pretty wide range of topics. Of course, and as is my privilege, I will save the last word for myself. But Chuck, you go ahead.
Final thoughts are, it's a good game. Opinions are subjective. So it's okay if you don't think it's a good game. But I think it's a pretty good game. And remember to check out the direct sequel, Metroid Other M. Thank you.
Damn it. Thank you, Chuck. Doominal, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Super Metroid today is still a fantastic game. Obviously, there's some stuff that, depending on your preference, might not have aged the best, but, I think what this game does right far outweighs the blemishes that it has, and in some aspects, I think it's still the industry standard, in my opinion. Absolutely worth checking out if you have NSO, and yeah.
All right. Jedi, go ahead.
Yeah, there are other Metroid games I go back to more often. Like I've played a lot of Dread. I've also played a lot of Metroid Prime. Those are kind of my go-to Metroid games. But I do think Super Metroid is an excellent game, and it obviously is the more important one. It is the one that sets the template for the whole series. Like every Metroid game is going to be compared to Super Metroid one way or another. So it definitely continues to trend. It definitely set that trend, and it continues to influence the series to this day. And yeah, I totally recommend it if you haven't played it in NSO. If you have NSO, you should go play it.
Nick.
I'm gonna say what I said earlier, and that made you mad. It's like this game is good, but very flawed. I think the main problems I have are the platforming, which I played a little bit of more modern Metroidvanias. I played a little bit of Hollow Knight and a bit of Ori. I felt the platforming in those felt good. Like when you jump, you felt like you knew where you're gonna jump, and if you didn't get that jump correctly, it felt like you did that wrong, not the game being bad or having bad controls. I did not feel the same with Super Metroid, unfortunately. I felt that the bosses were just not that good at all. And so I would say it's good but flawed. And if I had to give it a score, it would be a 7 out of 10, which is still good, Mike. Not everything below a 9 is unplayable.
Is it though?
It is. That means it got more right than it did wrong. So it's a good score. So, and it does make me want to go to other Metroid games. Like I want to try Fusion. I want them to put like Zero Mission so I can play that. I do want to play Metroid 2, or the remakes anyway, not the original.
I think you definitely should. Matt Remucky did write some thoughts real quick. Said, honestly, I thought I would be back in time. Just got home now. As someone who had played this game multiple times before playing this time, I decided to play the speedrun route. It was a really new experience. It made this a very enjoyable run. It was interesting to try and really push the controls to their limit. Seems I am running out of time. So quick thought of this. This is still a great game, and trying this route is totally something people should give a shot if they enjoyed it. Sean, we didn't really talk too much about the speedrunning, but this is like the speedrunning game. I watched the most recent world record, which isn't too old. Just watching that, still an absolute blast. It is so much fun watching people go through this game in the speedy manner.
And it basically invented speedrunning by incentivizing you through very 90s means to complete it faster or with higher item completion. And that's why we had things like speed demo archives back in the day, which would turn into what eventually spawned games done quick. And so that's why it's so important to speedrunning. And I do think as a speedrun game, it is fantastic. And I would also like to point out, Beef Hammer, they actively break the controls all the time in this game to make it go faster, similar to wave dashing and melee.
Thing they do?
Yeah, arm pumping makes her go like faster by 1 frame. So you're constantly seeing her arm go up and down in this game, yeah.
Incredible. That's just practice. For tubing later. Anybody else had anything they wanted to say before I kind of close us out here?
Me.
Oh, I thought you just talked a lot. Wow. Okay, go ahead.
You asked. First of all, Mike, are you on speaking terms with Per Schneider so you can go tell him that 7 out of 10 is not, in fact, a good? Or is that like out of line for us?
I'm not going to get involved.
Okay. Okay. Closing thoughts from me, though. I would like to point out, first of all, none of us said anything other than this is a very good game. And I would also like to point out that I'm glad that I'm free of the mantle of Super Metroid hater. Nick Turbo has taken the crown from me. Nick, sure. I'm glad I could pass the torch to you. This is phenomenal.
I said it was good. Good game.
You said it was a 7 out of 10. You basically said it was garbage.
7 out of 10, unplayable. Okay.
That's a 0 out of 10 on Metacritic.
Yeah. Okay, we're trying to wrap up here, so I'll try to keep it brief. My thoughts on the game are, it is a very good game. I do think it has its issues. Like I said, I think there are 3 major issues there, but they are varying degrees. And I think overall, none of them prevent this from being a good game. I think that the problem here is the problem that I was thinking of with a lot of games. And so I'm actually going to bring up the original point that I brought up on Last of the Nintendogs that spawned this entire 2-year journey to this point of Mike giving me crap about this game. I think this game is, if I had experienced it in 94, it would have blown my mind. And it is a revolutionary game. But in terms of my perceived quality and how I'm looking at it as a critic, I think it needs some kind of definitive edition. I was thinking about this with, we're
right,
soon.
That's why you want the remake Super Metroid.
Stay with me. As of this recording, we're like experiencing for the first time learning about Persona 3 Reload, which is a game that I've thought about a lot because there hasn't been a definitive way to play Persona 3. Do you want to play the original? Do you want to play Fest? Do you want to play Portable? None of them have everything. And so we thought Reload would be that game, and it's not either, which is a disappointment. when I look at Super Metroid, that's what I thought about at the end of my most recent playthrough. We need some kind of definitive edition of this game. And I do think that if you get the right team, and I will say don't touch it unless it is the right team, but if you find the right team, do have them make a faithful remake to just clean everything up. Or, you know what, worst comes to worst, have a Night Dive style remaster of it, where maybe if you can stretch out to widescreen, that'd be cool. But in general, just clean things up, like make the controls feel a little bit better. You know, bring things in line with the GBA games that the GBA games did well. If you can overlay stuff on the mapping and everything like that, overlay that. I think we need a best way to play Super Metroid, because on NSO right now is a subpar way in a lot of different ways. That's the only official way to play this game right now. So I think that Nintendo needs to do something to make this game the masterpiece that it was back then, and it still could be, because underneath the minor overall issues and the, I would say, one major issue, I think this game can really shine again, because it is fantastic underneath it all.
I guess I just worry. I think so much kind of had to come together for Super Metroid to be what it is. Once you start maybe messing with it or trying to change it, it could get a lot wrong, which I guess is the case for a lot of remasters and remakes, and they often come out well. So who knows? Okay, I think nobody else. So I just gonna kind of close it out here. And yeah, I just absolutely love Super Metroid, and I really mean that word, love. I think sometimes you love things in such a way that I know that they have faults, and people tell you about those faults, and you see what they mean, but they never matter to you. You're just very willing and able to see past them. They might not even be in your field of vision, because you just love what this thing is so much, what it represents, that you can't help but just feel warm and fuzzy every single time you think about it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this Super Metroid discussion. Next month, we are actually just going to be playing Starfield. It's going to be just another really busy month, this major big game. So we thought we would do that one more time this year. Not 2 months like we did with Zelda, even though this is a big game. We're going to give everybody a month, and then we'll all talk about what we have done. Then in October, spooky game. We're going to start thinking about what kind of spooky games we'll be voting for the October Game Mess Game Club discussion as well. Hard to believe we're coming to that part of the year already, but here we are. Thank you so much for everybody who joined me in the Discord, the text chat, and my chat channel here over on Twitch. Thank you for watching. If you're watching this later on YouTube, if you want to join the Game Mess Game Club, you can join our Patreon over at patreon.com/Game Mess. That'll give you access to the special Discord channels, which includes the Game Mess Game Club. Thank you so much again, everybody, and we will see you again next month.